Hi everyone, it's your boy Zach, and this is my review of Triple Frontier on Netflix. So, first of all, I gotta say, yeah, the audio is probably kind of weird because I'm backing up and I'm not looking. Okay, so, first of all, I gotta say, I looked up why it's called Triple Frontier because that was driving me insane. I thought Triple Frontier was a play on Triple Canopy. For those who, are old enough, geez, at this point, when we started the global war on terror, there was a big push for the use of private military contractors. And, Blackwater is probably one of the most famous ones. But then there's, actually, I'm trying to remember if Triple Canopy was related to Blackwater. At one time, Blackwater effectively shut down and it reimagined itself as something else. I don't think it was. I think Triple Canopy was a different. So anyway, Triple Canopy was talking about tabs, like you have a Special Forces, Ranger, and what's the other one? Airborne. So basically, you're super high speed. You're an operator. So I had to look that up, and it just stands for Tres Fronteras, which is an area in Colombia that borders two other countries. I would not have chosen that, okay, whatever. So this movie was recommended to me by Netflix, and I'm a military guy. So the thing about this is I actually pretty much avoid military movies. Now, before I was in the military, of course, I loved them, and they were about 33% of the reason I enlisted. The G.I. Joe comics were another 33, and then Team 7 was probably about 15%, and then whatever numbers left is from being in a military family. But anyway, the problem with military movies, when you get out, and you probably know this if you got friends or relatives that are in the military, is they become really annoying and silly, and you can't take them seriously. Then on the flip-flop, sometimes if they're well done, if the people in the movie, especially if it's based on a true story, did more badass stuff than you did, you get jealous. Now, I know if you watch older war movies, everyone acts like they were forced to go there. They all have this woo, man. They always have the woo, and it's like woo ain't nothing but kill. Like, no, we haven't had a draft for like 40 years. Our last several wars, Iraq and Afghanistan especially, every single person there was a volunteer. And if you were in combat arms, you were a double or triple volunteer, which means, you volunteered for the military, and then you volunteered for the infantry. And then if you got into special forces or special operations, you volunteered to be a Ranger or a Navy SEAL or whatever. And then you got to volunteer to re-enlist, because sometimes wars don't perfectly line up with your enlistments. It did for mine. Man, I joined in utter peacetime, May of 2000. And then they had the attack on, what was the boat where they ran? They ran like a fast moving, like a Zodiac up there and exploded it. That happened when I was in SOI, and we thought we were going to go to war over that, and then it didn't happen. And then I was deployed in Okinawa when 9/11 happened, and so I was, went to Iraq when I was in the Marines. That was like the first night of the war. We crossed over, and then I got in the Marines, finished my degree. I went into the Army. Immediately got sent back to Iraq, this time in like a headquarters position. But then I had to extend my enlistment because I wanted to go back to a combat zone. So I extended, and then I was able to go to a unit in the States that was heading to Afghanistan. So the deal, what I'm trying to say is, anyone who's been in war, any American who's been in war for the last 40 years, pretty much wanted to go there. Combat, because there's a war zone and you get combat pay, but there's a lot of people, not doing any disrespect, but there's a lot of people in tents, back on Kandahar and stuff like that. But if you're combat arms for the last 40 years and you're in combat, like, you really, really wanted to be there, and you did a lot of stuff to get there. So this story is about guys who have gotten out and their attraction to come back in. I've talked about this. I have another channel where I review comics. I'm guessing most people know that. And I talk about G.I. Joe. Now, G.I. Joe is obviously not superheroes. Most comics are superheroes, and most of the comics I like are superheroes. But G.I. Joe was very attractive to me. And Larry Hama, who basically created the modern mythology, one time he was asked, what's the appeal of G.I. Joe? And he says, most comics are power fantasies. They're for the kid who got bullied and he wants to pretend he's Clark Kent and he can take his glasses off and he's Superman and he can do anything. He can be incredible. But G.I. Joe is a loyalty fantasy. It's about being in a cohort, a team with people who will do anything for you. They will go to the ends of the earth for you, and vice versa. Movies and TV and everything, they don't really get the military right. I mean, they screw up basic things like grenades do not blow up an entire building. I mean, in this movie they had there was a couple cheesy things early on. RPG sending a giant SUV flipping into the air. It was like an RPG-7 rocket. It was like, no. And then the other one was a 203 round blowing up literally the entire floor of a house. And I was like, no. But kind of lost my train of thought a little bit. But so I was talking about the things they get wrong, and they don't really get the interaction between soldiers, specifically combat arms, because they do this kind of like they're all buddies from the block or something like that. It's not like that. It's a very unique human relationship that doesn't exist anywhere else but the military. It's a relationship that goes like this. I really, really like you sometimes, and other times I hate you, but no matter how much I feel about you at any one time, I will take a 7.62 round to the face to protect you. That doesn't exist anywhere else. I hate you, but I would die for you. And when you hate someone, it's just kind of temporary, and you're brothers. It's band of brothers, that type of thing. So the other thing that movies tend to not get very well is the attraction to combat, the attraction of being in danger. Funnily enough, and this is just one line of dialogue. It was actually from a Fast and the Furious movie. It was what's his name, the blonde guy. And it was like in the 5th or 6th one, and he had a wife and a kid, and she's like, "Hey, you got a kid now. You can't be getting into these adventures." And he goes, "You know what I miss?" He goes, "I miss the bullets." Having been in combat, I've got to say that it's nice, to be alive, but it's very bland. Peace is boring, and I just feel bored all the time. In fact, every time I've ever gotten into any kind of trouble, I realize, what? I was just kind of bored and just trying to simulate, some of the excitement of being in combat, being embattled and butting heads and stuff like that. So this is about, there's one guy, Oscar Isaacs, his name is Pope. He's kind of like he's like a military contractor advisor who works with the CIA. He's helping take down drug cartels in Colombia, but he's not doing that well. There's a local guy. They've been going after him for 3 years. Every time you think they win, there's a good scene where they take down a house, and then everyone's just like, you find out that, the drug dealer, he knew everything. Anytime you have two people, he knows what you're talking about. So then Pope has an informant who's kind of a love interest, kind of, sort of. And she says, this guy doesn't trust the banks. He's got all of his money in his villa. And, so the most unrealistic thing is that the drug lord has a ton of money. Oh, by the way, every single part of this is a spoiler. Go watch it and then come back. He has millions and millions, tens of millions of dollars. We find out later he has $250 million, and that's just in a partial search of the house. A hurried partial search nets $250 million. But he doesn't trust the banks. Okay. He keeps all the money himself. Okay-ish. But when you see the level of security, it's stupid. It's like 4 guys. No, that was dumb. So anyway, what happens is Pope is very frustrated. You know, he's been trying to take this down. There's corruption in even, you know, the federal police he's working with. So he finds about this money, and he basically says, you know, he goes to his buddies and he says, hey, you know, the CIA has a deal. If we get the money, we get to keep 25%. So he basically, well, he kind of actually tricks some of his buddies. Some of them are just ready to do stuff. Ben Affleck is just like, hey, I'm going to go down, but I got a kid. It can only be to do recon. And he's like, yeah, it's recon. And then he comes down there, they do the recon. By the way, I did not like the recon scene. I almost quit during the recon scene. The weapons handling, the tactics in this movie are very good. The understanding of the psychology and the loyalties of soldiers and the, you know, excitement and attraction of combat are really good. But they did this recon scene. Oh my God. It's like something out of the A-Team. They have no... barely any of them use optics. They go there during the day. They're literally just like standing in the bushes like 30 meters away from the road. And one guy's like, oh, I'm looking at their gate. They have 2 guards. And I'm like, they can hear you. They can hear you. So anyway, they basically say, then Oscar Isaacs is like, hey, look, man, like, and everyone, so they cast a lot of people who are actually kind of the right age for this. Another thing Hollywood does is they always get the ages crazily wrong. It's always like Bruce Willis at the age of 37 playing, you know, Private First Class Schmuckatelli. It's like, no, he would be a colonel at that age, you know, at least a light colonel, maybe a major. Then the other thing is they have people who are like 60 playing colonels. It's like, no. So Ben Affleck is a retired captain. He probably would have been a major, but that's fine. I think all of them were officers. And there's a couple little weird things, like they implied that they had all worked together for 17 years. And that's just not how the military... You get into special forces and you can stay in for a while. But most people, for career reasons, they'll go back to recruiting or even DI. They'll go to, you know, some kind of liaison, you know, job with a coalition military. You're not going to have like the same 5 guys working with each other, even in special forces for 17 years. So anyway, Oscar Isaac sells it to you. You know, he says to Ben Affleck, he's like, you've been shot 5 times and now you're like a realtor and you're broke. He goes, you can't even pay for college for your kids. He goes, I had a neck operation. My knees are shot. I looked it up. Oscar Isaac is he's like 39 when they filmed it. He looks a little older, but he's like, look, these operations, I'm all messed up. I had another guy, he's doing like bare knuckles fights for chump change. One of the saddest things is that they talk about the money. So at first they go to do like recon on a drug cartel. And the big deal is they're each going to make $17,000. Now, the thing that's sad is that, I'm not trying to brag, but I have a business that's doing pretty good. But I remember the years I got out of the military, I was in the Marines first and then the Army, and I was in the National Guard a couple times. The years that I got out right when the economy was trash. In 2010, and I was just broke for years. I was broke for like 3 years until I got to IT, and I mean broke, like Coinstar broke. So I remember those days where I was like, you know, young, fit. I had all those skills. For $17,000, I would have taken on any army myself. That $17,000 to a broke ex-military guy might as well be $17 million. So they basically say, you know, we've gotten shot up. You lose your marriage. You're deployed all the time. He goes, it's time to do something for us. And then there's a really good scene where they've been trying to get Ben Affleck to be the leader because he's the guy who's the best at tactics and planning. And he goes, hey, we're gonna do this, but just realize this is so much different than everything we ever did. We're criminals. We're going to murder someone. We can't have any illusions that we're doing anything else. And you actually see that hang on them because they've killed people, lots of people, but they've always done it with the idea that they are doing it for some greater reason. One of those other things, you know, the movies, they always get into this hand-wringing. You're like, we're in Iraq. but we can. I never served with anyone in a combat arms who had any negative version of what we were doing. Like I said, you volunteer 2 to 4 times to get there, and then you see the good you can do. You talk to the people, you see the people, and the way, I mean, we saw this with people who were living under Saddam. I mean, when we first rolled in, they were happy as hell to have us there. I saw this in Afghanistan. We pushed Taliban out of an area. People were glad. They just go back to farming and herding and all the things they were doing. There wasn't any like doubts or hand-wringing or like, oh, what are we doing? So you see them there where they're struggling with like, oh, we're just criminals. There's nothing noble. We have no cause except for money. And you see that. So one of the other things about this that is so great is it's pretty darn realistic, except for the recon scene, which was silly, and a couple things with munitions. Like, I talked in several other videos about how combat is not really emotional, and it's not even really scary. It's very, very logistical. Where are we? Where are they? How many of this do we have? How many of that do we have left? How many rounds do you have? How are you on water? Did you use up your med kit? Where's the trucks? Where's the helos? Where's the close air support? It's just a bunch of questions and answers and theories and directions and azimuths. So a lot of it is just dealing with the situation they are in. They go in expecting to get about like half a van's worth of stuff. Then they find out that if they would have been able to spend a day, they could have filled a semi-trailer with it. So they end up stealing way more than they were supposed to. And then they get to the plane, and they get a helicopter, but it's more than even the helicopter. So like there's this whole area where they're trying to get to the ocean, and it's just, they're talking about, fuel and weight and, the density of the air at this altitude and, going through a pass, and it's just good. It's just good. So then at one point they got to get over this high mountain pass to get to the ocean, and they cut like $50 million loose, but they're still there. It looks like they're about to make it, but then something in the engine blows and they crash. And I gotta tell you, this is one of the best crash scenes I've ever seen in any movie. Oh, so I forgot to talk about who's making it. So the screenwriter is Mark Boal, who, if you're into that type of thing, he might sound familiar. He wrote The Hurt Locker, which is so unrealistic that I consider it to be a comedy. I know people who haven't served, they watch it and they think it's really deep, man, but it's just silly. He also wrote Zero Dark 30, which I've heard has some silly elements, but is basically pretty solid. And I looked it up, and he wrote this script like 10 years ago, back in his heyday when he was like the hot screenwriter. It's been bouncing around. It had this crazy cast of like Tom Hanks, Mahershala Ali, Will Smith, Johnny Depp. It was nuts. It was going to be a bit, a movie, and then finally 10 years like kept falling through scheduling, and then they just sold it to Netflix. They got a freaking good cast. I got to tell you, I think this cast is better than those other ones because they kind of fit. Like Johnny Depp at the age of 50 playing a special forces guy. No, that's not believable. Neither is Tom Hanks. No, I know he was a Ranger in Saving Private Ryan, but no. They picked a good. Everyone looks like they could have been, special forces. It's believable. So then they crash into a field, and it's a drug farm, and it's really interesting because you think it's going to be one of those like, oh, everyone's so scared, but the farmers there are pretty savvy. Like they're like, we outnumber you. We got pistols. They try to lie. Oh, we're working for the government. He goes, no, you're not in uniform. No, you're not. So they end up shooting a couple of them, and then they have to take donkeys to go through the pass. And then I gotta say, like I was so into this movie. It's probably one of the best movies I've seen in 10 years. So what ends up happening is it just gets harder and harder. And at one point they're down to, so Ben Affleck gets killed. And then so one thing I'll say is, I thought it was going to go one way and it didn't. I thought it was going to be, that's like, they did the wrong thing and everyone's going to pay and they're all going to get shot. And then there's going to be a scene of like the money floating over them and going onto their corpses. Some like really obvious end. But what happens is Affleck gets shot. By the way, these are very realistic firefights. I mean, it totally remind me. Like you're always just like, where are they? Where are they? People shoot from as far away as possible, and they're trying to hide. It's like just finding where they're shooting from is. You just kind of got to extrapolate from. Although there's always one guy in every squad who's like great at spotting the shooter. I was never that guy. Always over there. You know what I mean? In fact, usually I would just look where everyone else is shooting, and that would be a big hint. Tracers are very helpful. Anyway. So once Ben Affleck dies, then it becomes like, okay, we just got to get out his body. He's got kids. We can't leave him. So then you see, like, they're not dirtbags. Somebody referred to this as a modern day update of Three Kings, and it absolutely is not. Three Kings was a big deal in its day, and it really fell off. And it fell off, I think, because it had a lot of contempt for soldiers. It was a lot of herder, only rednecks and poor people from the ghetto joined the military. Herder. And like all the locals were like these saints, and the military people were just these greedy idiots. And it really fell off. But this one seems to really understand. It's not like a rah-rah patriotic. Like, they make it really clear. These people are criminals, they're murderers, and they're just trying to get money. But they struggle with sup. At one point, they say they're kind of on the home stretch, and they say, the local, they got like a little militia. It's a bunch of teenagers, and then they're just like, no, we're not shooting a bunch of teenagers. These are just a bunch of broke teenagers paid, $100 to pretend to be a soldier for one day to catch us. So they try to go around them, and then at the end, they basically, okay, I'm just going to tell the end because it was so good, and hopefully, okay, there's a great surprise at the end. Go see it and come back. So at the end, you think like they're down to like maybe they got like 250,000, but they've got large denomination bills. So at the end, they basically had probably about 6 million because this offshore bank says after our fees, you have about 5 million, and it was 5 of them on the team. So even though one died, so there's this great bit where they're all there and they're very depressed. They lost their friend. And it's just not worth it. They all technically could have $1 million, but it's a bitter victory. It doesn't feel like a victory at all. So then, like, the youngest guy, he just says like, screw this. He rips up his contract because they were going to give $1 million to Ben Affleck's family, and so like the youngest guy, he goes, screw this, give it to his family, and then all the rest of them do it. So they went through all that hell, and then when it comes time to be like what matters, they're like, we screwed up. The daughters of Ben Affleck's character don't have their dad anymore, so we're gonna set them up for life, $5 million in a trust. And then there's even a cool part where one of them, I'm blanking on his name. He's the guy who played King Arthur. He was in Sons of Anarchy. I want to call him Garrett Hedlund, but that's the guy who plays his brother. So then they had established that he was a little bit, he always counted everything, which is actually a good skill for someone in the military. So at one point they have like $100 million left, and they dump it in a gorge because they just can't carry it. They got to carry the body. And then at the end, they're basically, everyone's like, what are you going to do? I don't know. And then they give it to Oscar Isaac's character. He hands him a little piece of paper, and it's the latitude and longitude of the gorge where they dropped the money. So it's basically like, hey, he could go back, he could get it. So I looked online, people are already wanting a sequel. I don't think it's gonna happen. This is like a real dream team, and it's a miracle they got these 5 guys to line up to do this movie. But it was a nice little happy ending. You go, maybe he'll get it. The funny thing is, like, they kept showing this position, and it was just like this straight shot to I don't even think you would have needed it. I think you would have been able to walk by and find it. And then I was even thinking, I go, it wouldn't be that hard, because they showed that 5 backpacks can carry $5 million. I don't even know if that's true, but whatever. So I would just go back. I would wait like a couple of years, go back there with some real good mountain climbers, and then just do some, rappel down, and then have some winch to carry him back up. Like, that'd be like an afternoon. So I don't know, just planning out how to get that money. But anyway, it was just it was. I thought it was gonna be like a solid but corny Hollywood military story, and it ended up being like actually pretty deep and emotional. And then just like, except for a couple of scenes, like the understanding of the military and like that mindset, very very well done. So I looked up. So it's J.C. Chandor, who I haven't seen any of his movies. He did great. He hasn't done a movie in 5 years. And then Mark Bowl, who, like I said, I wasn't that creative. This is the best thing. I mean, it was fan-friggin-tastic. So go check it out. It's on Netflix right now, Triple Frontier. Thanks for watching. Bye.